these at mic talks is they're a little bit different than your typical webcast. So if you've ever been to an actual SANS event, in live, in-person conference, one of the really neat things about those is not only do you have fantastic speakers, hands-on learning, but also quite often in the evenings, there's all sorts of social activities and additional talks. And those evening talks are called SANS at Night talks. Well, seeing as how we are operating in the virtual world and many of you are taking virtual classes, we're still offering the value of those evening at night talks. We're simply calling them, instead of SANS at SANS at night, we're calling them SANS at mic. And as I mentioned before, my name is Lance Spitzner. I am a SANS instructor. In fact, I've been one for over 20 years. I've been in cybersecurity since '98, and the first 10 years were really focused on the technical side. So if anybody wants to nerd out and get geeky, happy to afterwards. But really the past 10 years, I've shifted and focused on the human side. But because to be honest, at this point in cybersecurity, that's where I feel we need the most help and can make the most difference. So today we're going to be talking about building a strong security culture, or as you see here in this title, it's the same thing, leading change, but I kind of like the twist on this. And quite often we talk about, how do we secure the human? Well, we're going to be kind of taking on the approach, well, how do we humanize security? So with that said, we're going to go ahead and jump right in. But two things about online, which is fantastic. A, everything's going to be recorded so you can review. So if you have to drop out or you want to review something. But B, also you can ask questions, in that little chat channel right there, ask questions at any point, and either I'll try to answer them right there, right away, or I'll review all the questions at the end. All right, with that said, let's go ahead and jump in. Now, before I start with the solution, I always like to first briefly cover the problem. And in this case, the world of information security on the culture side, what is the problem? And in many ways, this is the problem. The problem with, humanizing security or securing humans, however you want to approach it, is this. The problem is not the human. Far too often in our geek world, when I talk to cybersecurity professionals, I quite often hear, oh, Lance, you just can't patch stupid. In other words, when you hear somebody say that, they're saying people are the problem. If they only did what we told them to do, all of our problems would be solved. And I'm going to kind of flip that. And I'm going to say, well, you can't say you can't patch stupid. In fact, what I'll tell you is, go look in the mirror. A big part of this talk, and in some ways it can be a little uncomfortable for us, is perhaps we should take a step back and stop blaming people for being insecure and maybe look at ourselves. Perhaps the reason the rest of the world is insecure is we're not doing a very good job of helping them be secure. And that's what a big part of this little short webcast is going to be. How can we humanize security? How can we solve the problem so security is simpler for others to do? The simpler security is, the more likely they're going to do it. Let me just show you a little bit more understanding of the problem and why we really can't blame people. So what I'm going to show you here is this. In this little graph, it shows you in the past 20 years, all of the technical controls Microsoft has put into the Windows operating system. Now, 20 years ago, it was really easy to hack a default Windows computer. In fact, if you took a default install of Windows, NT, or XP in early 2000, 2001, 2002, and you put that out on the internet, it would take the bad guy 3 hours to find and hack that random default install. I know this as fact because that's the research we would do in the Honeynet Project, an organization I helped found many years ago. Now, Microsoft felt a lot of pain, and in the past 20 years, they have implemented a tremendous number of controls to secure the default operating system. Nowadays, if I take Windows, default, put it on the internet, it will take weeks, months, if not years, before that operating system is hacked, because it is so much more secure because of all of these technical controls. By the way, this is only a high-level overview. Now, the risk really happens when the human touches the keyboard. Then all bets are off. Now, before we blame people, though, look again at your screen. Look at we've done everything for the Windows operating system. Well, what have we done for the human operating system? Yes, human OS. Most computer operating systems store, process, transfer information. You and I store, process, transfer information. We are nothing more than another operating system. If that is the case, what have we done for the human OS in the past 20 years? And the answer would be not much. In many ways, not only have we failed people, failed to communicate, engage them in their own terms, we failed to simplify security, but I would argue we have gotten so good at using technology to secure technology, we're literally driving the bad guy to go after people. This is why I don't like to say people are the weakest link, because when you say people are the weakest link, it implies it's their fault. So instead, what we're going to use is this. They are the primary attack vector. The reason why people are the primary attack vector, because, go back, we've gotten really good at using technology to secure technology, but we're still really bad at securing the human operating system. So until we can do this for both, we're going to continue to lose the battle. So what I'm going to show you is how can we do for the human OS what Microsoft has done for the Windows OS. And that's what we're going to be talking about here today. But it's just not people, behaviors, awareness, workforce. We need to take a step back. It's also culture. So what happens here is bring up one of the most famous breaches in the history of breaches. And I know it is a long and convoluted and messy history. Equifax would probably bubble up at the top of the list at one of the biggest. Now, what's interesting about Equifax is not only is it one of the biggest, but it's also commonly perceived as a purely technical hack. The bad guys got in by exploiting a vulnerability in Struts, which is a third-party add-on little goodie for the Apache web server. So talk about Equifax, people think in terms of technical vulnerabilities. But if you do a deeper dive, and what's fantastic is Congress did just that. In 2018, Congress released a congressional report on the breach. And it is probably one of the most well-documented, researched breaches in the history of breaches. If we had this much data and detail on every big breach that happens out there, we would have the data we need to really minimize these breaches. It's a fantastic report. Go out there, download it. But long story short, yes, the bad guys got in exploiting a vulnerability. The reason, though, the vulnerability was there is their culture was absolutely dysfunctional 4 years ago. All sorts of issues. Ultimately, go back one. Ultimately, the many issues, the CIO and the chief security officer never talked to each other, totally isolated reporting structures. They had a failure in vulnerability management. You want to know why? Nobody was in charge of vulnerability management. It's amazing. You look at all the congressional reports and everybody's pointing someone else, blaming someone else. It was a disaster. So not only is the human side of security about securing the individual human behaviors, but also addressing the organizational culture to help create a much stronger security culture. The better your culture, the more likely people are going to exhibit the behaviors you want. All right, Lance, this is all fantastic. What's the solution? So let's go ahead and transition into how can we secure our workforce? How can we create a much stronger, secure culture? And all that in less than 30 more minutes. So let's go ahead and do a deep dive. Now, first, turns out people are just like mass. You're like, what? Huh? Go on here. We're going to actually apply Newton's first law, the law of inertia, to people. In other words, inertia. Newton says, hey, an object at rest remains at rest unless a force is applied to them. Turns out, and you can do all sorts of research, people are the same. People by default are not going to change their behavior, their perceptions, attitudes, or beliefs unless a force is applied to them. Now, Newton's three laws, very, very famous for one of the mathematical formulas, force equals ma. For the physics nerds out there, mass times acceleration. So it turns out we need to do the same thing for people. We have to apply that force. But what's even more exciting, as you will see in just a moment, the equation is actually exactly the same. The law of physics, the law of securing people. Now, before I do a deep dive and nerd out in all this, one of the things I want to bring up is this. One of the biggest challenges and one of the most common mistakes we make is we in the security community will go out and say, yep, that's right. We need to go forth and tell people what to do and be secure. So when you and I and the technical community out there, when we go out in front of people and tell them how to be secure, this is how we perceive ourselves. We're the digital cyber ninja warriors of cyberspace, here to safely secure the world and the entire cyber domain. And you and I and our fellow geeks, we all perceive ourselves as this. The problem is when we go out and we start communicating to our workforce and we attempt to apply that force that I just mentioned and change human behavior, when you and I start communicating to people, this is not what they see. You want to know what they see when we're talking? This is what they see. Yes, nerds. By the way, can anyone guess the name of this movie? If you do know the name of this movie, it's from a movie, two things. One, you are a nerd. Two, unfortunately, you're actually a really old nerd. Classic movie from the 1980s. Yep, nerds. Beth, real, nope, not Real Genius. Appreciate it, Michael. Anybody else? Go ahead, just post away, folks. Post away in the chat channel here. We have Nerds, Real Genius, Revenge of the Nerds. Fantastic. Oh, yep, boom, 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 boom. All right, sorry to say, it appears we have quite a few old geeks on this. It's a classic. Highly recommend it. But making a little fun of our community here, folks, but there's a big element of truth. When we go out there, this is how most of the world is perceiving you and I. So what can we do to change that? Well, one of the neat things is this, both good and bad. So what happens in the world of cybersecurity, we deal with all of this new fantastic technology. And as a result, we think since the technology is new, why our problems must be new. And if our problems are new, we have to come up with the solution. In some ways, in some cases, that's very true. But when it comes to the human side of cybersecurity, and remember I started off with, we have to have both. We can't focus on just technology. We need the human side. When it comes to changing human behavior, changing organizational culture, things like behavioral economics, human psychology, behavior modeling, why reinvent the wheel? There's a fantastic fields of scientific research with books, papers, case studies, and entire fields of study in all of this I'm covering. Here are just some of the most influential books that have really helped me better understand human behavior, organizational culture, behavioral economics, and things like that. And instead of us reinventing the wheel, let's go into dip into the world where really a lot of smart people have come up with a lot of stuff. So what I'm about to show you is a very synthesized version of all of this different research. These are all fantastic books to read. Now, what's interesting is as you start reading all of this research and other research, and it is in fields of things like behavioral economics, change management, organizational change, behavior modeling, is all these really, really smart people are actually all saying the same thing, just from a different perspective or a different way. And what I've done is taken all this research and kind of consolidated it and synthesized it to as simple as possible. So if you want to learn more, here are some fantastic books to start out with. If you have a great book that you've read that's not here, I'm always looking for new recommendations. By the way, one of the most common questions I'm always asked whenever I present this slide is, Lance, this is awesome. Which book do I start with? And I've actually thought about it. And you know what? This one right here. Out of all these books, I actually recommend you start with this one because it gives you a nice high-level overview, and it's probably the easiest to read. Out of all of these, the hardest one to read is the one right above it, Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, which, by the way, won a Nobel Prize in behavioral economics. That book took me 3 months to read, not because it's difficult to read in the way it's written. It's very easy. It's every single page is like a new field of study. It is information dense. So recommend start with Switch, finish with Thinking Fast and Slow, and kind of fill in the gap there with those other books right there. So the whole purpose of this slide is this. Why reinvent the wheel when it comes to the human? There's tremendous research. Let's just apply it to our world. And that's what I've just done this here right now. Now, one of those most fascinating things from the research, and I'm stealing this from Daniel Kahneman's book, is this. And I'm trying to help you better understand how to secure your workforce and build that culture. In all of the research that he's done, and with a lot of other research assistants and things like that, is they break down the human mind and how we think into two general categories. And a lot of the other books talk about this in the same manner too, including that book, Switch. The human brain operates what's called System 1 and System 2. System 2 is our analytical, logic-driven, data-driven brain, very rational. Think of Spock. And we like to think that this is how the human brain operates all the time, and this is how you and I operate all the time. That we are very analytical, data-driven, logical in how we consume data and act on that data. The problem is that's very brain-intensive, time-intensive, energy-intensive, and really the human brain is lazy. And if you think about it, it's a survival instinct. You know, if nothing else, being Spock all the time burns a lot of time, a lot of calories. So the brain shifts System 2 only when it has to. Normally, we always go with System 1. The problem is this. When you and I and organizations architect their security policies, processes, and procedures, and they build that security environment, we're building it for Spock. But when you look at all of this research from all these different individuals, what we need to do is build System 1. System 1 is where how your brain by default thinks. And this is where you go with intuition, emotion, gut instinct. And then we only switch to System 2 when we have to. So don't build for System 2. Don't build for Spock, build for System 1. Now, when I was reading all of this books and research, I was going, well, if Spock is System 2, who's System 1? And the best analogy I could think of is for System 1 is this. Our friend Homer. So when you're building your security policies, processes, and procedures, when you're architecting your environment, build them not for Spock, build them for Homer. Now, before we start laughing, keep in mind this applies not only to our workforce, but you and me. This is how our brain, by default, wants to operate. So we have to keep it light, we have to keep it simple, we have to keep it emotional, because Homer has to understand it, and Homer has to act on it, not Spock. All right, so if we're going to build and design for a kind of a System 1 environment, how do we do that? Well, first of all, I want to just give you an example of, if you are doubting this, this is a very famous example from Daniel Kahneman's book on how he helps demonstrate this idea of your brain doesn't like going into System 2. So I'm going to give you a little word challenge, and the word challenge works like this. And this is taken from the book. And like I said, I'm just trying to demonstrate you really use System 1, not System 2. Word challenge. A baseball bat and a baseball cost a total of $1.10. For our European friends, $1.10 euros, whatever you want to call it. So bat and ball together, $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. And the question is, how much is the ball? Just real quick, how much is the ball? Folks, go ahead in the chat channel. How much is it? Together, they're $1.10. The bat is $1 more than the ball. How much is the ball? All right. Now, if the number 10 cents jumped to your mind, it does for me all the time, that was your gut instinct. That was your Homer Simpson coming in. Think about it. If the bat costs $1, if the bat costs $1 more than the ball, and the ball costs 10 cents, well, that means the bat costs $1.10. The ball costs 10, total $1.20. So Dave gets the gold star of the day there. It's actually 5 cents because the bat is $1.05, the ball is 5, comes to $1.10. All this simple little word puzzle here is trying to demonstrate, just help you better understand. Be careful. Homer Simpson is always trying to jump out because the brain is lazy. It wants to short circuit to the answer easiest way possible. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that Newton's law. Remember, force equals mass times acceleration. But turns out, after doing all of this research from all the scientists, all these different models, Adkar's ProSci model, John Cotter's 8 steps, and all those books, I synthesized it down to, well, you know what? If you're going to apply a force to your organization, motivation and ability. Remember, it's the same letters, M and A. It's instead of mass and acceleration, motivation and ability. How can we motivate the change we want? And how can we give people the ability or enable the change we want? So let's do this. And once again, this is all over a high-level overview. And by the way, I'll have the link at the end. If this is really interesting to you, this is really nothing more than a just small overview of a 2-day course I teach called On Security Culture. So that's why we're kind of moving fast and furious here. A lot to cover. So anyways, MA, secret to your culture, motivation. What do I mean by that? Well, far too often, you and I, or any security professional, when we have to secure our workforce, DevSecOps, vulnerability management, rolling out password managers, whenever we're going to do something from a security perspective, we always tell people what to do and how to do it, because that's what they need to know. But in all of these research and all of those books, probably the most famous, Start With Why, is when you need to change behavior, you actually start with why. Simon Sinek calls it the golden circle. And there is a fantastic 15-minute talk on YouTube called the golden circle. Please, 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 after this, just go to YouTube, search golden circle. He is the easiest, most fun person to watch when he's talking, and he explains the whole idea. The most successful leaders, the most successful marketing campaigns, the most innovative companies, like an Apple, whenever they communicate, they don't say, what they sell. They don't say how they sell it or how their product is better. They go into why they're developing these products, why they have the organization mission. So when you begin to do any type of security initiative, don't start with what people should do or how to do it. You take a step back and you go with, why should people care? In all of this research, they go into and explain this concept of cognitive bias. Cognitive bias is nothing more than your brain taking a lot of shortcuts so it can quickly process a lot of information and act on it. The problem is these shortcuts can have us make the wrong decisions or bad decisions. And there's lots and lots of cognitive bias. One that impacts us here is something called curse of knowledge. The more of an expert you are at something, the worse you are at communicating it, because you project what you know onto others. You know cybersecurity is important. You know why it's important, but that also happens to be your passion and it's your job. For 99.9% of the world, they don't care. They don't think security is their job. It's not plugged in. So when you start giving them all these complex processes, policies, procedures, they're tuning you out because you're just being, to be blunt, a pain in the ass. So first we have to explain to people why cybersecurity is important, why they should care. Now, before you go over to protect our data and stuff like that, One of the important things all of this research shows us is you have to explain it in terms that they understand and care about. In other words, why should they care about security? How does it impact them? What's in it for me? You know, the old sales quote of with them. So when you're crafting your security message, don't go into what or how. First, start with why. And don't go into why it's important to your organization, but how does the individual benefit? Why should they care? If you're rolling out password managers make your life simpler. Instead of worrying about passwords, you can focus on work. You can use password managers at home. DevSecOps, you know, helping developers code securely. It can help their promotions, compensation, new fields of work, differentiate themselves, new job opportunities, bonuses, all sorts of things. So try not to perceive the benefit from your perspective, but from others. So kind of sound like marketing? Well, that's because it is. We have to sell security, and we have to sell and engage them at an emotional level. And once again, this is all based on all those books I read. So if we're going to sell cybersecurity and explain why people should care, once again, why reinvent the wheel? There's an entire field of study called marketing. Go to the marketers, steal what they're using, even better yet, get them to help you. There's a very well-known model in the field of marketing called ADA. It's over 100 years old. Everybody with a marketing 101 degrees heard of ADA. Now, there's a lot of models that have followed after it, but I'm just trying to demonstrate how you can apply from the marketing field to cybersecurity. ADA is nothing more than the whole idea of 4 acronyms right here. And ADA is nothing more really than a funnel. By the way, this is how people sell us laundry detergent. This is how restaurants get that, still go buy, go in the restaurants. This is how shoe companies sell us shoes, computers, cars. This is how everybody sells stuff to us. And the whole idea behind the ADA marketing model is it's a funnel. And the whole idea is this. The funnel starts with, hey, look at me. I'm over here. Don't look at the competitors. Look at me. It's all about get your attention. Then once they get your attention, then they develop your interest. Hey, you've got a problem? We've got the solution. Then they flip that interest into desire. They go from getting you to go, ooh, I like that, to, ooh, I want that. And once they drive that desire, they enable you to get what you want as easy as possible. One-click shopping. So when you're building and structuring your security initiatives, your outreach programs, your awareness program, anytime you're trying to develop a stronger security culture, think of first you have to motivate. And when you motivate, you have to start with why. Why should anybody care about cybersecurity? You explain it in terms that benefits them, not from your perspective, but from theirs. And you can use a whole field of study called marketing models such as ADA to help you better frame how you're going to do that. It's literally a framework, a model for marketing. We have NIST cybersecurity framework. Marketing world has ADA. By the way, ADA is very old. There's a lot of variants, different versions of that model, but if anybody's in marketing, they've heard of this. Now, on the flip side, though, we tend to think of security awareness and cultures having to motivate people. And that's all about changing people. But on the flip side of the coin, we also have to change security. We have to make security as simple as possible. So when we tell them to do X, it's simple for them. Remember, curse of knowledge. Just because something is simple for you does not mean it's simple for the rest of the world. So let's shift gears there. And how can we enable people, give them the ability to be secure? So fantastic book called Nudge. That was one of my 6. And what they call it, Nudge, is all about the choice idea of choice architect. The whole idea is you can architect an environment where people will exhibit the behaviors you want without them even really realizing it. You're kind of nudging them in the direction you want. And there's all sorts of, once again, cognitive biases that are covered here, and how people think and how people behave, things like choice overload, cognitive overload, inertia, things like that. And one of the really cool things in the book is this idea, or the example they gave of how to architect change is, and ladies, for the ladies on this call, I know this is going to be a shocker for you, but when it comes to the public restrooms, at times men don't have the best aim when it comes to urinals. And this is a fantastic example from the book of how nudge was applied. Yes, shocking as I know, the term in the industry, and there's a term for this, is called spillage. So apparently when bad guys have bad aim, it creates a mess, and there are costs involved in cleaning those mess up. There's a fantastic story of how Schiphol Airport, to address these issues, they started nudging men to improve their aim. And they did that by, and guys, I'm sure we've all seen this, putting a sticker in the urinal. And the sticker would be, a fly, a spider. All it is a target. And for every grown man, there's a little boy dying to come out. In other words, when the bad guys, when us gentlemen started using these urinals in the Schiphol Airport, we had a target. And that target, channeling our inner boy, gave us target practice. So in other words, gentlemen's aim dramatically improved. So there was an 80% reduction in spillage, 8% reduction in costs. So the whole thing, and that's just one of many, many, many examples. It tends to be, one of the funnest but shortest examples. So the whole idea is, how can we architect an environment where people are doing what we want them to do without them even realizing it? So what ends up happening is, when it comes to ability and enabling and things like that, there's really you have two hammers or two levers you could really leverage. And the first is, what can we do to simplify security? The simpler security is, the easier it is for people to do what we want. We're architecting that environment. The other one is to kind of train and enable people, give them the education, the skills, and the tools to make what we want as easy as possible. Now, in the class, we do a really deep dive in this, but for simplicity purposes of this short webcast, I'm going to combine an example of how we can both enable people and simplify security in just one simple example. And that example is passwords. Passwords are a key behavior. It's one of the most important behaviors to managing risk and creating a secure environment. Year after year, the Verizon DBIR, Data Breach Incident Report, and if you've never read it, I highly recommend it. It's one of the very few truly data-driven reports out there on managing risk. Year after year, they find one of the most key behaviors to helping manage risk and stop the most common drivers of breaches is good passwords. And you read every week about weak passwords, bad passwords, or what gets me is, every week you see some security researcher or journalist publishing an article, site A got hacked, all the passwords got dumped, the 10 most common passwords were bum, 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 bum. Aren't people lazy or stupid for using these bad passwords? So let's do this. Let's just take a moment, press that pause button and go, okay, you know what are we telling people? Perhaps it's not their fault, it's our fault. And we'll be telling people things like, every password has to be 15 characters long, uppercase, lowercase, number, symbol, mix in the blood of a virgin, then change that nightmare of a password every 90 days. Oh, by the way, never write that password down. So we're telling people all of these different steps, these different behaviors, and then we're going, well, gee, the world is so stupid because we're not telling them what to do. And when you take a step back and you look at what we're telling them, it's actually really, really painful. So whenever it comes to policies, processes, or procedures, remember, every behavior has a cost. Fewer behaviors, better. But remember that curse of knowledge. Don't look at processes, policies, procedures, whatever. Don't look it through the lens of you. Look it through the lens of others. What could we do to architect where this would be so much easier? What can we do to enable people so they have the ability to do what we're telling them to do? we're going to kind of combine this all together. And let me just walk you through this. Well, first of all, what can we eliminate and get rid of? How about password expiration? Changing passwords every 90 days? Turns out 20 years ago, when it took the average computer 90 days to crack the average password, you know what? That makes sense. Fast forward to today, when it takes, the average, Amazon cloud 9 seconds to crack the average crackable password, that whole 90 days thing really doesn't have any value. And if you think having everyone in your organization change that number 1 at the end of their password to a number 2 every 90 days has any value, it doesn't. In fact, if you really want to geek out, a lot of times when people have password expiration, they have password history. So in other words, when the bad guy gets in, he doesn't have 1 password hash to crack. He has 5, 10, 15 passwords to crack also. So which actually increases risk. So you know what? Kill password expiration. By the way, for those of you out there, NIST officially announced that 2 years ago in SP 863B. So first of all, just go through, what can we get rid of? What may have made sense 20 years ago, but has anybody actually asked, hey, does that still apply nowadays? If you can't eliminate it, can we replace it with technology to make it simpler? So things like for passwords, can we do biometrics or single sign-on? So for example, many of you have a mobile device. Yes, this bad boy right here. 5 years ago, if you wanted to enable a screen lock on that, you had to type it. That's painful. Then Apple released fingerprint, then they have facial recognition, things like that. Now, are they absolutely perfect? No. Are they good enough for 99% of the world? Absolutely. The key thing, using that fingerprint far easier than typing in the screen lock. As a result, people far more likely to have screen locks. So can we eliminate the process? No. Can we replace it or make it simpler with technology? In this case, yes. But what else can we do? If we can't replace it with technology, can we simplify the process? In this case, you know what? Uppercase, lowercase, symbol, number, dead. Complexity, dead. All NIST found in their research was all complexity did was make it easier for computers and much, much harder for people. And that's where you get all this bad password behavior. In fact, the Wall Street Journal article, when NIST released that SP 863 series of documents, the Wall Street Journal interviewed the individuals at NIST who originally created the complexity requirement, and the individuals from NIST said, yeah, that was kind of stupid. So complexity is dead, and for entropy, you just go with length. All right, 15, 20 characters, passphrases, random words, long sentences. It's much easier to remember, much easier to type. Finally, can we provide people tools to make it easier when we're asking them to do something? Password managers. Are they perfect? Nope. Are they better than the what we were telling them before? Absolutely. Huge fan of password managers. So if you go through this process, all of a sudden we've architected an environment where it is much, much easier for people to do what we want them to do. You want to know why people hate cybersecurity professionals? Why your security culture may be toxic? Because you really may have these really painful requirements that everyone hates doing, and then we don't give them any tools to do it. So here's an example of architecting. Then when it comes to communicating, we want to communicate in ways that people can easily consume it. Hate to break it, but for a lot of geeks out there, we're not the world's best communicators. We understand the problem, bad at communicating the solution. At USAA, they've taken all of their policies, processes, and procedures specific to their customer support team, people answering calls. Now, USAA is a bank, very big one. They deal primarily or service primarily veterans or service members of the US military. And what they've done is in their policies, processes, and procedures is they've not only simplified them, but documented them as a comic book, gave it to their customer support folks so they can easily identify fraud attempts called red flags and stop fraud from happening. keep in mind these customer support people, they're fielding phone calls from their customers who are servicemen. Quite often a spouse is, on deployment in Afghanistan, so really unique problems, calling at odd hours. So we want to be sure we enable those customer support people to quickly identify and stop the bad guys who are trying to take advantage of those servicemen. But also, not only can we want to communicate in their terms, but provide them the information they need. So another just quick example, human sensor. The whole idea of we want to reduce the attacker dwell time by being able to identify and stop them much sooner. Instead of having them on the network for 3 months, that is bad. We want to reduce that time so the bad guy is spotted and kicked out in, say, 3 hours. Now, we've used a lot of technology to try to detect incidents, and we're getting it down a little bit. But we also want to leverage people. Think about it. Detection at its simplest level is nothing more than knowing what is normal activity and looking for abnormal. Think about all those different technologies out there. IDS, SIM, centralized logging, all that's artificial. They're all looking for the abnormal. Think about it. Who better to find abnormal than people that know what normal is? Your IT admins. They deal with those systems every single day. They know what abnormal looks like. If you're going to develop a human sensor network, develop them, train them, and give them the tools to quickly identify abnormal activity. So this is an example of a Linux intrusion detection cheat sheet, downloadable from the SANS website, from one of the SANS courses. I just stole it for the purpose of this presentation. Give people a cheat sheet with the commands. Now, obviously, this is for Linux. The commands of how to look at processes, files, logs, and what to look for. And notice the word in every title: unusual, abnormal. Those are the indicators. Put this at every desk of your IT admins. You now have a human sensor network. Increase your detection ability, decrease your attacker dwell time, all by architecting an environment that's easier for them. Not you, but them. All right, we've covered a lot. When you get back to your organization, just a couple of key takeaways. First, whenever you're communicating to or outreach on behalf of any security initiative, remember Simon Sinek and that golden circle. Don't tell them what to do or how to do it. Always start with why. Yes, you may know why, they don't. And even more important, don't communicate why in terms of you. Communicate why in terms they should care about. Go to the field of marketing. In fact, you probably want to partner with somebody from communications or marketing and make that a long-term partnership. Anytime you're doing any communications outreach, instead of you trying to be the expert, go to a comms expert, go to a marketing expert. Then also review your policies, processes, procedures. Are there any that people just keep not doing, that people struggle with? Stop blaming them. Take a hard look at yourself. How can we simplify our processes? Are there any we can eliminate? Are there tools we can provide to make them simpler? Anything you can do to create or architect an environment where it's easier for people to do what you want them to do, the more likely they're going to do it. All right, let's wrap things up. One of my favorite quotes from, one of my famous security thought leaders, Bruce Schneier, basically saying, hey, if you think technology can solve the problem, you don't know technology, and you know what? You probably don't understand the problem. And I'm in no way saying this is a human issue. I'm saying security is both technology and human. My concern is we've spent 20 years perfecting the tech side. We now have to also start addressing the human side, or we're going to continue to lose this battle. So there's my email. If you have questions about this webcast or anything human related, you know where to find me. Also, if you're interested in nerding out and learning a little bit more, what's really fantastic is I teach 2 different courses, one on human behavior called Management 433, and one on security culture called Management 521. They're now virtually offered, so what's fantastic, multiple time zones, multiple options over the next couple of months. You can learn more at that URL. And finally, you'll notice Jessica has just posted the URL for the evals for today's webcast. We would love your feedback. Now, I know this was fast and furious because you know what? I know you folks are busy. So if you want to drop, go ahead and drop off. But if you have a question, I'd love to see what your questions are. And I see we have the, let's see here, the whole questions window. I'm going to go ahead and pull that up and start going through your questions now. So we'll go ahead and spend the next 5 minutes or so trying to answer those questions. Oh, so we already have a book suggestion called Orbiting the Giant Hairball. And there's so many good books out there. Let's see here. What was the report title again, please, from Ali? So Ali, the report is called the Verizon DBIR, Data Breach Investigation Report. And it's very famous. It's been going on since 2012, 2013, started by a guy named Wade Baker. And it's one of the most respected and well-known data-driven reports out there. Highly, highly recommend you get that. So another question, Aaron asks, is this being recorded? Absolutely. Poor Aaron, he says, I was interrupted. You know what? We're all interrupted. Spouses working from home, kids e-learning from home. So don't have. So how do you feel about the balance of surveillance against mitigation? So that's a privacy question. And you know what? Every organization's culture is going to be a little different about this idea of surveillance. A university has a very sharing, open culture, so that probably would not work. We're a defense organization like a Lockheed Mountain, a Raytheon, military. They're probably going to have a far more conservative, lower risk tolerance culture. So probably surveillance isn't going to be an issue. So something like that is more of a culture question. So let's see here. Communications of CyberSec program advice. Absolutely. One of the key things I'm going to recommend, and this goes back to some of the terms we used earlier, is choice overload, cognitive overload. Whenever communicating any type of security program, so for example, we all have people working from home now, and we have to secure them working at home. So we have to communicate to them. What you don't want to do is overwhelm them with all of these behaviors on how to be secure. We're really bad at that in cybersecurity. We focus so much on perfect security, we just dump all this stuff on people. Remember, people working at home probably aren't used to it. They're overwhelmed, like you and me, spouses working at home, kids e-learning. So what you need to do is be as concise and as simple as possible. Instead of teaching people 10, 15 behaviors, prioritize them and go, what are the top 3 key behaviors I need to focus on for people to be secure at home? Not 10, not 15, not 20. And you quickly realize one of the hardest things about humanizing security is not deciding what to communicate, but deciding what to cut. So you can really focus, because the more you overload people, the less likely they're going to act on it. So my number one suggestion is minimize what you communicate, make it as simple as possible, prioritize, and that's not easy. So for example, if I was going to create an awareness program, training program for people how to work from home securely, out of all the things I could teach them, I'd teach them 3 things, and only 3 to minimize. That way you're not overwhelming them. And that would be A, the number one attack vector is you. Bad guys aren't hacking technology, they're you. So first thing, I teach people social engineering. What is it? The most common indicators and how to stop it. Number 2, I would teach them about passwords. Remember, the Verizon DBIR has found that's one of the key ways bad guys got in. So number 1 is social engineering. Number 2 is passwords. Number 3 is updates. Keep all your systems updated and current. Yes, antivirus is important. Yes, firewalls are important. Yes, encryption is important. But you know what? If people aren't doing those first 3 things, all those others are irrelevant. Now, you may disagree, and that's fantastic. Pick your own 3, pack your own 5. What I'm really just trying to demonstrate, long answer to a fantastic question. Key thing in communication is the less you communicate, the fewer behaviors, the more likely you will have an impact. How do you measure success on culture? Do you have some examples? Well, it depends on how you measure, I mean, what is your definition of culture? Depends on what you're attempting to achieve. Is it a small little initiative where you're trying to get your developers more secure, often called DevSecOps? Or is it ultimately an organization-wide effort where you're trying to impact your entire workforce? So a couple of things, there's different ways you can measure a strong culture. What are some indicators? A common way to actually measure is use something like a survey. Human resources, they have things called engagement surveys. We can do something similar. But indicators of a very strong security culture would be things like people feeling comfortable reporting reporting an incident, even if they caused it. Think about it. What good is people knowing how to report an incident if they're afraid to? If you have a punitive culture, they're not going to report. Do people request for additional training? Do they request security to come and brief at other types of events? Do employees help their coworkers to be secure? Do they point out what they're doing wrong, provide tools, things like that? So how do you measure? You can do things, focus groups, surveys, measure and track certain behaviors, but then there's also what are you looking for? And then there's all these different indicators. And like I said, the Management 521 course, we spend an entire afternoon on just that. All right, folks, we're coming up to the end of the day. Let's see here. What ends up happening is this. Like I said, you've got my email address. Reach out to me if you have more questions. If we didn't have times to answer them. If you really want to nerd out, more courses, you can learn at that URL below. Otherwise, this was recorded. You can get the slides over on the webcast URL. Otherwise, you know what, folks? Thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. Good luck out there. Stay safe. Catch you later, folks. Catch you in cyberspace.